The most disgusting Wild West meals. What would you eat if dinner meant survival? Which sounds worse to you? A pie baked from soggy crackers and lard, or soup made from boiling cow guts for hours? Cowboys of the Wild West swallowed both, along with fried bull testicles and patties made from animal blood. But why did they eat these shocking meals, and how did they endure the taste? You'll know that later in this video, so stick around. Have you ever wondered why cowboys ate bull testicles? Yes, you heard that right. Later in this video, we will uncover why they became a camp favorite. But first, let's step back into the dust and grit of the Wild West. Life on the trail was rough. Food was scarce. Cattle branding season gave cowboys more than just sore backs. It gave them fresh prairie oysters. These weren't pulled from the ocean. They were harvested straight from young bulls during branding. Why eat them at all? Protein was precious. Meat was not always easy to cook or carry. Every scrap of animal mattered. Nothing went to waste. Native tribes had long eaten every part of the buffalo. Cowboys followed the same rule with cattle. The process started right there in the corral. Young bulls were cut. Testicles were tossed into a bucket. Not many men today would volunteer for the cooking job, but for cowhands it was just another chore. Preparation was simple. The outer skin was peeled away. Sometimes the organs were pounded flat. Then they were dredged in flour or cornmeal. Finally, they hit a skillet slick with bacon grease. Imagine the smell of smoke, fat, and sizzling meat drifting through camp. But what did they taste like? The texture was half jelly, half rubber band. The flavor was mild, almost bland. Cowboys joked they were eating calf fries. The greasy crunch of the flour coating helped hide the chewy center. Have you ever bitten into calamari? If so, you're close. Prairie oysters had that same bounce. Some cowhands swore they tasted like chicken. Others said they were closer to liver, but everyone agreed they filled a hungry stomach. Why risk gagging on them? Because life demanded calories. A day in the saddle burned thousands. Prairie oysters packed protein and fat. One cowboy said he'd eat his boots if salted enough. By comparison, these were a luxury. Were they popular? Not exactly. Some ate with pride, others with clenched teeth. Jokes and tall tales grew around them. One ranch cook claimed they gave a man courage. Another swore they kept cowhands from getting scurvy. Of course, neither was true, but the stories made the meal easier to swallow. Let's pause here. Think about the campfire scene. Dust-covered men circling a skillet. One brave soul stabbing a piece with his knife. The others watching, waiting, laughing. Would you have tried it? Or passed the pan along? The cultural footprint didn't die with the frontier. Prairie oysters survived into modern ranching towns. Even today in places like Montana and Colorado, you can order a plate at a bar, fried crisp, dipped in cocktail sauce, served with a beer. Tourists order them for bragging rights. Locals sometimes order them for fun. Is it the same dish as the cowboys ate? Almost. Today they're cleaner, seasoned, and often deep fried. But the roots remain: survival, thrift, and a dash of humor. Now let's ask a bigger question. What does this tell us about cowboy life? It shows toughness. It shows creativity. It shows how little went to waste. When you live in a land of scarcity, every bite counts. Compare it to modern eating. Today we toss scraps without a thought. Back then, scraps were supper. Prairie oysters might sound strange now, but to them it was common sense. And here's an irony. While some laughed at the dish, others treated it as a test of manhood. Eat a prairie oyster, prove you're no greenhorn. It became a symbol as much as a meal. Later in this series, we'll look at even rougher meals, like cow stomach soup. But before we move on, let's close the loop. Why were prairie oysters eaten? Not for taste, not for fun, but because hunger demanded it. And because on the frontier, wasting food was never an option. So next time you see prairie oysters on a menu, remember the cowboys. Picture the branding fire, the skillet of bacon grease, the laughter around the camp. Then ask yourself, would you take a bite? Or would you quietly pass the plate? Have you ever smelled something so bad it made your eyes water? Later in this video, we will uncover why cowboys still force down cow stomach soup. But first, let's set the stage. The open plains gave little comfort. Long drives meant long hunger. Cattle were valuable, but beef wasn't always on the menu. Why waste prime cuts when you had a whole herd to drive to market? Instead, cowhands made do with the scraps, and few scraps were stranger than stomach. Cow stomach, often called tripe, was tough. It was rubbery, pale, and smelled awful, but it was also part of the animal, and frontier rules said waste nothing. What could not be fried was boiled, so the Dutch oven became the tool of choice. The recipe was crude: cow stomach hacked into chunks, dumped into water, maybe a pinch of salt if the cook had some. Then it was boiled for hours over a smoky fire. The water turned into greasy broth. The stomach pieces bobbed around like pale sponges. Can you imagine the smell? Cowhands said it could drive a man downwind. Sour, gamey, and heavy. One cowboy joked that skunks smelled like roses in comparison. Still, the soup filled the pot and kept the crew alive. Why eat it at all? Calories. Soup stretched thin rations into something shareable. Boiling also softened the tough meat enough to chew. And hot broth in the cold prairie night could keep a man warm. Taste was another matter. Greasy broth slid like oil down the throat. Stomach pieces chewed like rubber bands. Some compared it to chewing saddle leather soaked in lard. Others just held their nose and swallowed fast. Have you ever been so hungry you'd eat anything? The cowboys were there often. Days of dust, rain, and miles left no room for pickiness. Cow stomach soup wasn't about pleasure, it was about survival. There were rare improvements. If onions or wild herbs could be found, they went into the pot. Sometimes hardtack crumbs were added as thickener. Even then, the flavor never lost its sour tang. One trail cook joked that it tasted like boot water with attitude. Did anyone enjoy it? Surprisingly, yes, some grew used to it. Others claimed it cured stomach aches. Whether true or not, it became part of cowboy folklore. Like prairie oysters, it carried a badge of toughness. Let's step back. Where did the idea come from? Tripe soups had been common in Europe for centuries. Immigrants brought the tradition west. The difference was, back in the old world, cooks had spices and thyme. In the West, cowboys had fire, water, and little else. Even today, tripe soups survive. Mexican menudo, Polish flaki, and Italian trippa are all descendants. Unlike cowboy soup, these versions are rich with chili, garlic, or tomato. So the cowboy dish wasn't unique. It was just stripped bare. What does this tell us about frontier life? It shows the constant fight against waste. It shows the hard stomachs of men who worked from dawn till dusk. And it shows how food became less about flavor and more about fuel. Imagine the campfire, tired cowboys circling the pot, mugs in hand, steam rising with that unforgettable odor. One man slurps it down fast, another gags, a third laughs at them both. Would you take a sip or pass the cup away? There was also humor in hardship. One saying went, "If it don't kill you, it'll cure you." Cow stomach soup was both punchline and punishment, but it was also proof of resilience. Now here's the irony. While most cowhands dreaded the soup, it became legendary. Writers later painted it as a symbol of the Wild West, not glamorous steak, but greasy stomach broth. And in a way, that picture is more honest. Later in this series, we'll look at blood pudding, another dish that tested courage. But before we move on, let's close the loop. Why did cowboys eat cow stomach soup? Because it was there, because it kept them alive, and because no man could afford to waste what the herd gave. So next time you smell a rich beef stew, think of its leaner cousin. Think of a Dutch oven simmering on the trail. Think of men choking down greasy broth under the stars. And then ask yourself, could you have stomached it? Or would you have gone hungry? Have you ever tasted iron in your mouth after a cut? Imagine that flavor stretched into a meal. Later in this video, we will uncover why cowboys fried blood into patties. But first, let's look at the reality of the frontier table. When settlers butchered livestock, blood was everywhere. Most people today pour it down the drain. But for cowboys, waste was not an option. Every drop could be turned into food, and so blood pudding was born on the range. The recipe was rough. Catch fresh blood in a bucket, usually from a cow, pig, or buffalo. Stir in flour, cornmeal, or whatever grain was at hand. Sometimes a chopped onion if luck allowed. Mix it until thick like batter. Then fry spoonfuls in hot grease until they held shape. What did it taste like? Imagine biting into a metallic sponge, chewy, crumbly, and soaked with iron flavor. Some cowboys gagged at the first bite. Others ate with little thought, focused only on filling their bellies. Why risk such a dish? Simple. Blood was loaded with protein and calories. In times of scarcity, blood pudding gave men strength for another long ride. Hunger often beats disgust. Have you ever noticed how hunger dulls your senses? Cowboys did. After 10 hours in the saddle, they weren't food critics. A hot patty, even a strange one, felt like a gift. Still, jokes followed every batch. One trail cook called it rust in pancake form. Another claimed it built iron in the bones. Laughter around the skillet helped men swallow what their tongues disliked. The method wasn't unique to cowboys. European settlers had known blood sausages for centuries. Irish, English, and Germans ate black pudding with pride. Native tribes also used blood as thickener in stews. The cowboy version simply stripped it down to its plainest form. Could it be made better? Yes, if spices or herbs were on hand. But in the open prairie, that was rare. So most often, it was just blood, grain, and grease. Nothing more, nothing less. The frying helped mask the raw taste. Crisp edges gave texture, like biting into cornbread with an iron aftertaste. If eaten with hardtack, it could even pass for a meal, not a good one, but a filling one. Imagine the scene. Night falling, fire crackling, skillet sizzling. Cowboys passing around patties, some laughing, some gagging, some silent. Would you have tried one, or let hunger gnaw instead? The smell was sharp, metallic, smoky. It clung to the air and to clothes. One cowboy joked you could smell a blood pudding camp a mile away. Yet the food was eaten, because survival left no room for pride. Did it harm them? Not likely. Blood was safe if cooked well. Frying killed bacteria, and the flour bound it tight. In fact, it may have helped keep men strong on thin rations. But the dish never earned love. When better meat was available, blood pudding vanished fast. It was the food of lean times, of last resorts, of hunger. It was never the first choice. Still, its legacy lingers. You can find modern versions in diners abroad. Black pudding in Ireland, boudin noir in France, morcilla in Spain. Those dishes use spices and skill. The cowboy dish was bare survival on a skillet. What does this teach us about cowboy life? It teaches thrift. It teaches toughness. It teaches the art of eating what the land gave. While others dreamed of steak, they swallowed blood cakes without complaint. Now here's the irony. Today, foodies pay good money for gourmet blood sausage. Back then, cowboys would have paid not to eat it. Later in this series, we'll step into salt pork stews, meals so salty they cracked lips. But before we move on, let's close the loop. Why did cowboys eat blood pudding? Because hunger was louder than disgust, and waste was a sin on the frontier. So next time you see a farmer drain blood from fresh meat, remember the cowboys. Picture that blood frying into a patty, sizzling in bacon grease, and ask yourself, would you have taken a bite, or would you have chosen to stay hungry? Have you ever taken a gulp of seawater by mistake? Imagine that flavor cooked with bacon fat. Later in this video, we will uncover why cowboys still boiled sowbelly into stew. But first, let's ride into camp and see what was on the fire. Sowbelly was salt pork, packed tight in barrels. It was cheap, greasy, and tough. Ranchers bought it by the cask because it lasted for months. Salted so heavily it could survive heat, dust, and long drives. It was survival food, not fine dining. When rations ran low, the cook pulled out slabs of sowbelly, thick chunks of fat and streaky meat, crusted with white salt. It was so salty it cracked lips and burned tongues, but it filled the pot and fed the crew. The recipe was crude. Cut the pork, throw it in a Dutch oven, cover with water, and boil. As it bubbled, greasy foam rose to the surface. The cook skimmed it with a spoon, then ladled out cups of hot broth. What did it taste like? Imagine bacon water, but far stronger. Briny, greasy, smoky. One cowboy joked it was like drinking from a pig-infused ocean. Another said it was a cure for thirst and hunger at the same time, because it killed both. Why did they eat it? Because it was there. Beef on the hoof was too valuable to slaughter daily. Cattle were money, not meals, so cowhands lived off pork barrels, beans, and hardtack. Sowbelly stew kept them alive through long trails and lean seasons. Have you ever been so thirsty that water itself was a treasure? Now imagine water so salty it left you drier than before. That was the curse of sowbelly stew. It filled the gut, but left men reaching for the canteen. Some tried to soften the blow. Cooks soaked pork chunks in water overnight to leach out salt. Others boiled, drained, and boiled again. But even then, the taste lingered. Salt so deep it felt welded into the meat. Texture made it worse. The fatty parts melted into greasy slicks, coating lips and fingers. The leaner parts chewed like leather boiled too long. No matter how it was served, the meal was hard on both tongue and belly. Yet cowboys laughed about it. Humor was the only seasoning. One saying went, "Sow belly stool keep you alive, but never happy." Another joked it kept teeth from rusting. Can you picture the scene? Men around a fire, lifting cups of steaming broth, gagging, slurping, or grinning through the pain. What would you have done? Taken the sip, or handed your cup back? The cultural roots of salt pork ran deep. Soldiers had eaten it through wars. Sailors had carried it across oceans. By the time cowboys came along, sow belly was already legendary for being awful yet dependable. And dependable was the key. Pork lasted. Beans might run out, flour might spoil, but salt pork never failed. It was the glue that held frontier meals together. Even today, you see echoes. Cured pork products remain staples in pantries worldwide. Bacon, ham, pancetta, all distant cousins of sow belly. Though far tastier, they prove the idea worked. Preserving meat with salt meant survival. So what does this dish say about cowboy life? It says endurance. It says sacrifice. It says men valued survival over flavor. When the choice was empty bellies or greasy salt broth, the broth always won. Now here's the irony. Today, bacon is prized, sold at high prices, celebrated in diners. Yet its ancestor, sow belly, was cursed by the very men who lived on it. Later in this series, we'll uncover a sweeter lie, the so-called mock apple pie. But before we move on, let's close the loop. Why did cowboys boil sow belly stew? Not because it was good, not because it was healthy, but because it lasted, and lasting meant life. So next time you taste bacon with your breakfast, think of its ancestor. Picture the dusty trail, the Dutch oven bubbling, the steam heavy with salt. Then ask yourself, could you have swallowed that cup? Or would you have pushed it away and risked going hungry? Have you ever bitten into something that looked delicious but fooled you? Later in this video, we will uncover why cowboys baked fake apple pies out of hardtack. But first, let's step into the chuck wagon kitchen. Real apples were rare on the plains. Orchards grew back east, not in cattle country. Fresh fruit spoiled on long drives. So when cowboys wanted pie, they had to fake it. Necessity turned into invention, and thus mock apple pie was born. The recipe began with hardtack, those rock-hard crackers that could chip a tooth. The cook soaked them in water until they turned soft and soggy. Then he layered them in a skillet with lard, sugar if he had it, and sometimes a dash of vinegar for tang. The mixture baked over coals, filling the air with a sweet smell. From the outside it looked like pie, golden crust, bubbling filling, a promise of comfort. But the first bite told a different story. What did it taste like? Wet cardboard dipped in candle wax. The texture was mushy, the flavor flat. If sugar was scarce, it was worse, bland and greasy. Cowboys joked it was apple pie in name only. So why bake it at all? Because men craved sweetness. Weeks of beans, pork, and coffee left their tongues desperate for change. Even a bad pie was better than none. Have you ever longed for a food that wasn't there? Cowboys lived that daily. They dreamed of home kitchens, of mothers pulling pies from ovens. Mock pie was a poor substitute, but it sparked memories. Sometimes cooks got creative. Cinnamon, if traded from a town, was sprinkled on top. Dried apples, if found, were stretched thin with hardtack to bulk the pie. Still, most often it was lard, soggy crackers, and wishful thinking. The irony was cruel. The smell made cowboys smile, but the taste made them grimace. One cowboy said it was pie for the eyes, punishment for the tongue. Another joked that the cook should be jailed for fraud. Can you picture the scene? Hungry men gathered as the pie was sliced. Eyes bright, hands eager, chatter loud. Then silence as the first bites fell flat. Some laughed, some cursed, others chewed anyway. What would you have done? Kept eating, or pushed the plate away? Mock apple pie had roots beyond the West. Pioneers' wives made versions too, especially during shortages. Later, even companies like Ritz Crackers published recipes for fake apple pie. The cowboy version was just the roughest, stripped of elegance. What does this dish tell us? It shows how deep the craving for sweetness ran. It shows how memory mattered more than taste. It shows how even tough men still longed for comfort food. Nutritionally, It offered little: starch from crackers, fat from lard, maybe a trace of sugar, but it broke the monotony. It gave men a moment of dessert, even if the dessert was disappointing. And here's the irony. Today, some food historians bake mock apple pies for fun, treating them as curiosities. But for cowboys, they were no joke. They were reminders of what was missing. Still, the dish lingered in memory. Stories of the pie passed down with chuck wagon lore. It became a symbol of frontier hardship, where even dessert had to be forged from scraps. Later in this series, we looked at prairie oysters, cow stomach soup, blood pudding, and sowbelly stew. Each dish revealed survival, thrift, and toughness. Mock apple pie adds another layer, showing not just hunger, but longing. So let's close the loop. Why did cowboys eat mock apple pie? Because they wanted sweetness, they wanted comfort, and they refused to give up on the idea of pie, even if apples never reached the trail. So next time you enjoy a real apple pie, think of the cowboys. Picture the skillet, the soggy hardtack, the hopeful smell that lied to the tongue. Then ask yourself, would you have smiled at the trick, or would you have spit it out and walked away?